Family first. That was the mantra my parents instilled in me from as far back as I can remember. It wasn't just something they said, it was woven into the fabric of our lives. Our entire community believed in it, and every summer reinforced that belief. Growing up, summer vacations meant packing up and heading to my grandparents' home, where a multi generational gathering of family awaited. Their house was more than just a home. It was a universe filled with laughter, endless chatter, and the delightful chaos that only comes when several generations live under one roof. My parents were both the eldest siblings in their families, which by default makes me the eldest of my generation. It came with its own unspoken responsibilities, but it also meant I got a front row seat to everything that unfolded in our daily, lively family gatherings. My maternal grandparents lived in a three-story building in India, and the third floor belonged to my maternal grandfather. So it was divided into three apartments. And through the walls separating them, more felt like lines of sand that were just invisibly drawn rather than real boundaries. My Nanaji, that's my maternal grandfather, occupied the largest apartment, sharing with it his five sons. Next to them was his younger brother, who lived with his three children. And in the far corner was the smallest apartment where my mum's youngest uncle lived with his two kids, a man that was younger than my mum herself, making our family tree more like a jungle gym of relationships. I do remember trying to figure out the dynamics. Doing the maths was pretty tough, but I just got confused and I was happy. There were too many cousins, uncles, aunts, and seemingly endless number of babies that were born as well. But the joy that I felt hopscotching between these apartments, weaving through the thin walls and that barely separated us was indeed unforgettable. It was a maze, but a maze full of love, laughter, and stories where family truly did come first. No matter how many doors divided us, they were never closed. I grew up knowing that family wasn't just a part of life, it was the core of everything. Hello, everyone. I'm Goldie, your host for today.
And I'm Lakshan. You are listening and watching episode 5 of Mind the Gen Cap podcast.
Lakshan, as I delved into the research for this episode, I was struck by a personal realization. Many of my family members, even close friends, and I have experienced firsthand the dynamics of multi-generational living. What fascinated me was how this lifestyle is seeing a resurgence in the Western world over the past decade or so, while at the same time, urban India is going through a significant shift in the absolute opposite direction. This contrast is particularly intriguing for us here at Mind the Gen Gap as we explore the intersection of Eastern and Western family dynamics. Have you been following our episodes, guys, or tuning in for the first time today? You are invited to subscribe and share our channel in your own networks. This is, in fact, how we also learn about different generations, as comments from you are useful for future content. Now, coming back to today's episode. Personally, I grew up in a nuclear family of 4 people. But after marrying my husband, I spent 20 years living in a joint family setting, an arrangement that is deeply rooted in Indian tradition. I must add that whilst this is unusual in the West, it is also not entirely uncommon to find when you do your research. In India, multi-generational living is traditionally referred to as the joint family system, which for generations has been the backbone of Indian society. However, in recent years, urban India has seen a marked transformation, with nuclear families becoming more common, reflecting broader societal changes. This is research offered by Chakrabarti and Deshpande 2015 and 2010 respectively. In contrast, in the West, where countries have undergone industrialization, It became typical for young adults to leave home, often moving to distant towns for college and employment thereafter. And this need also comes from a desire to become economically independent. However, research done at the Pew Research Center marks that as of March 2021, 59.7 million US residents lived in multi generational households, compared to 58.4 million in 2019. After a huge decline for decades, multi generational living has actually been growing steadily since the 1970s, with the number of people in such households quadrupling from 1971 to 2021. I just want to make a quick note here. Guys, remember 2020 was the year of COVID. I'll leave that in the air for you to reflect on. This contrast between the West's return to multi-generational living and India's gradual shift away from it raises some interesting questions about the societal forces driving these changes. And I found myself very curious about what's behind this divergence. Lakshan, you have been born and raised in India and belong to the millennial generation. So, can you tell me your own family dynamics and what have you observed growing up around your life?
Yeah. So, with respect to my family dynamics, right? My mom often talks about how different life was when she was part of a more um, joint family setting compared to a nuclear family setting. She would often talk about when she was living in Sri Lanka, about how she was so close to her cousins, more so than her own sisters, simply because there was a larger age gap within her siblings and a much smaller one between her cousins. So she would share with me a lot of stories about her sisters and extended family and cousins and all of this stuff. And it seemed like they were living under one roof and just having this such a ball of a time. And when she compares that to how things are in a nuclear family setting, she's like, it's not quite the same.
Mm,
It's true that there is a lot less misunderstanding and drama and all that stuff, which inevitably will arise when there are so many people under one roof.
mm,
But she found it a lot more exciting when she always spoke about her time when she was younger in a more joint family setting. My personal experience would be that growing up, for the most part, I have only seen a nuclear family. It's my parents and my brother, the four of us. And in fact, now, even though I am 28 and my brother is turning 24 in a few months, we still stay with our parents.
mm.
Um, the reason is, in my case, one, well, it's a financial reason. I live in Bangalore, and it isn't the most economically friendly city to live in. So that's one thing. Of course, I also am building a business with my father, so it's just easier for us to be living under one roof. My brother, similar reason. He just prefers to be able to work from home, which ties into what you said about how COVID was a time that everybody can reflect on with
Mm,
respect to how it set this resurgence for multi generational living, right?
absolutely.
And when I think about the other, say, side of my own family dynamics, I would say a good portion of my family lives in Tamil Nadu, and the other portion of my family, I would say, lives in Sri Lanka. We are the only family from uh, immediate family who live in Bangalore. So one reason for that was an active decision my dad took, not just because of the opportunity that he got over here in terms of work, but also because he felt like while it's very nice to be around family, um, it's also quite frustrating being in that environment too often
Mm.
because of all the quote unquote drama that unfolds. So he felt like it's just better for his children to grow up away from all of that, all the misunderstanding, all the issues that come up with being around family all the time.
Mm.
That being said, I think whenever we do go to family gatherings, we appreciate the experience a lot more because we're like, hey, we're meeting everybody under one roof for the first time in like a long time. In fact, in the middle of the year, in June, I had actually gone for a family wedding, and it was the first time in a good 10 years or so where the entire extended family was there attending the wedding. So it was a great time. So my experience would be that I've only really known what it's like to grow up in a nuclear family setting, but I do understand and appreciate how wonderful it can be in a joint family setting, but also how frustrating it could be in that setting.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And as I was hearing you speak, there's two very famous quotes that come to mind. One being, distance truly makes the heart grow fonder. This is relevant even to me, as I did explain my summers, but they were temporary settings, weren't they? Which is, I think, what I keep in my own memory as a wonderful time spent with my cousins. And this is what draws me back to them every year. And then, as you were talking about, the word drama came up a lot in your narrative. And I think I would best call it too many cooks spoil the broth. So, this is something that I think time and time serves as a pattern that we observe in multi-generational living, especially, in the Far East and the Indian subcontinent, which is what we are most familiar with. Um, Now I'd want to use this moment to actually speak about an example very relevant in the UK, which is now moving on to the Western setting. And it ties in a little bit with what you said about financial reasons for you to stay in Bangalore with your parents, because it's not the most economically sound area to have your own place. It's quite expensive, I'd imagine. As coming back to this example, it's from data in the UK. Last month, I was actually able to listen to an episode from a podcast called Today in Focus. It's produced by the newspaper The Guardian, and they addressed the rising numbers of 30 somethings, so millennials essentially, that are moving back in with their parents. The increase declared is almost a 14% between 2011 and 2021. So that equates to nearly 4 million families in Great Britain. This trend reflects a wide number of circumstances that include finances, mental health, the housing market, and just shows really the kind of change in how young people really are reaching and approaching those sort of milestones that we've always thought of as, very key to adulthood. And as I examine the data in the West, it's becoming increasingly apparent to me that multi-generational living is often more a necessity than a deliberate, conscious choice, quite different to what happens or was happening even in the East. Yes. And what stands out to me, beyond the idea of personal choice, is the constant shift between living arrangement that each generation often can go through. I'm going to use my own example again. I grew up with, my parents, and then I spent a few years living independently during my higher education. I then returned because I got married to a multi-generational living for 2 decades. And now, for the past 4 years, I find myself back in a single family household with my husband and two children. So now I want to ask you, Lakshan, as you hear me speak about these shifts, what do you picture occurring for the different parties as they undergo this generational living, multi-generational setting, and single household living scenario?
Hmm. Recently, I was listening to a conversation about um, someone who is a boomer, a very late boomer, talking about how both his kids have officially left the nest. Um, Both his children um, are abroad pursuing their uh, higher education, and in case of the other one, work as well. And he was talking about how he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what to do. His his wife doesn't know what to do, and it's almost as if they have to reimagine or come together to find a new way to move their relationship forward, because it's so new to them, having had their children around for 20, 25 years, 20 years or so. Imagining life without them, suddenly it's a reality. Like when you say imagine what life would be like without them, it's a reality for them. And he was fairly he was in distress about it. And I was like, wow, man, like as kids, we often or as 20 somethings, we often can't wait for the opportunity to leave home,
Mm,
because we want our own independence, our own place to live, work we want to do, and whatever, right? Be able to spend your money as you wish and will, come back home at whatever time you want. But as parents, the experience that they go through is very different. No,
mm,
they go from worrying about you when you're in the house with them, to worrying so much more when you're not with them, worrying about you when you're not with them, worrying about their own relationship and what to do with the time that they have, and reinventing themselves and the relationship that they have with their spouses.
mm,
So that's something that I feel like is the experience that single family settings go through. And I think people in a multi-generational setting, I think it's slightly different, because another example that comes to my mind is when a couple of years back I had gone to Hyderabad, because a friend of my dad's had invited us to his place, and I did not know what to expect. My dad did not tell me anything about this. I went there, and it's this 4 story or 5 story house, and it's a joint family. Okay, this is the first time I'm actually visiting or witnessing a live joint family setting, and they had invited us for breakfast. I had no idea what to expect, and I was blown away
yeah.
when I got there. They have the kitchen in the ground floor, the dining hall in the ground floor, and they have the living room in the ground floor. So the entire family comes down for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, all at the same time, the same table. And they have conversations going on, and each floor is for each of the brothers. So there are three brothers. There's one floor for each of them, and it's them and their entire family, right? And even the kids, that there were like children, I would say people from Gen Alpha all the way to millennials, who are kids, who are living in that same under the same roof, quite literally. And it was a riot. They were having such a ball of a time. They took the karaoke system out, and they were singing and doing a lot of fun they were having. And being someone who's introverted myself, I was like, too much energy, too many people. I did not expect this. What the hell is going on? But it took me a while, but I really got into the swing of things and started spending time with them, enjoying my time with them. Of course, once I got out of the setting, uh, my battery was completely drained. Um, but I think as you get older, you start to value family a lot more,
Mm,
and which is why people who are older seem to be a lot more happy with the idea of being under one roof together, because I
mm,
think they understand at the end of the day, family matters. Family comes first, as you said in the very beginning.
yeah.
So that's what came to
Mm.
my mind as you shared this stuff with me, Goldie.
Absolutely. I think what I'm listening as you speak is there's definitely not any one perfect equation. It's so relevant to mention the personal context that you're in. At what point in your life does this happen to you? If you grow up in a multi generational environment, you are definitely more flexible, I think would be the word. Once you grow older, this shift can come. And I think the scenario you mentioned, as you said, was a riot. It again echoes for me as the jungle gym that I mentioned at the very beginning. So now I come back to the settings that India has lived for the last 50 years or so. The motivations for multi-generational living are often governed by the cultural values and social fabric of relationships. It's clear, as I said, we can't label one system of living as inherently better or worse. Each comes with its own set of advantages and drawbacks. Rather than taking sides, my aim today is to explore what research reveals about these dynamics. And from there, I will share some insights from a case study involving somebody that I interviewed from the Canary Islands in Spain. Okay. Um, let's do some theory work first. A research paper that I read, written by Mr. Mukesh Ahuja, he's a sociology lecturer at the Maharana Pratap Government PG College at Chittorgarh, this is in Rajasthan, India, has clarified the many reasons for the shift towards nuclear family units in urban India. So, what we are seeing in the last couple of decades. There is an intricate interplay between socioeconomic, cultural, and demographic changes that contribute to this shift. Statistics are revealing factors such as education, career opportunities, and exposure to global values that have actually reshaped family ideals and aspirations. So, globalization is a real thing. This is very interesting, as the impact that such changes have on family and societal constructs can include redefined roles, responsibilities, and of course, intergenerational relationships. I find this very interesting myself. And I recently had a conversation with both my children, both Gen Z, 19 and 16, respectively, about how they would see themselves geographically positioned in years to come. Both of them confidently agreed that it would depend on their careers and where this took them. Neither of them mentioned the need to have us parents involved in their choices, as it was understood they would move out as soon as the opportunity would come up. In contrast, I remember turning 21, I'm Gen X, and my parents both expected me to return from university in the UK and set my future home in Spain. I surrendered actually an employment opportunity that was on offer in France at the time, limiting my prospects not to just Spain, but only Madrid. I do want to emphasize that this was not something I contested much either. It was a default decision, and I had very little margin for negotiation. Would I have wanted to make the move? Perhaps a part of me did want this autonomy, but I also understood the narrative my parents presented me with. So this example backs up the paper written by Ahuja, stating the departure from, age-old traditions, the ones I respected, such as assuming you look after your aging parents, replaced by more individualistic pursuits and a priority for personal space, which I also firmly advocate in today's day and age. What are your views on this, Lakshan?
The factors that you mentioned are, I think, very clear when you voice them out. I think when you keep that in mind, suddenly you see it everywhere.
Mm.
And but I also believe that for the most part, um, life comes full circle. You are with your family, then you want to fly like a free bird, and as time goes on, you're like, no, I want to spend my time with my family again. Is the narrative that I'm seeing in India, at least. I believe that's the case globally as well. But I
Mm.
also do know that there are plenty of uh, people who've taken the choice to for whatever reason, either prioritize their own personal space and independence, or they feel like there's better opportunity elsewhere, and they would just have their parents either stay by themselves, or they would put them in a in a community of other parents as well.
Mm.
And that's something that I experienced fairly recently, only the beginning of the year. Actually, I told you about that when I came across this. What do you call that stuff? That the community where like there's like a bunch of you know, older people.
An
What do you
elderly
call these
home?
community? I don't know. No, not an elderly home per se. Um, it's that living arrangement where there's like a bunch of houses, independent houses.
Yeah.
Um, Different families are staying there, and the criteria to be in that place is for you to be, I think, 55 or 60 years plus. So you have to be a senior
Hmm.
citizen, and like all of them live in the same locality, the same community, and there's like a common not a mess, but like a common dining area and like a clubhouse with all these facilities and all that. So that's the first time I came across something like that. But when you first asked me this question, Goldie, what came to my mind was this story that I heard of this content creator who said that he this was in the US. He stayed a good 3,000 miles away from where his parents stayed. Him and his wife's parents, where they stayed. And apparently, he was having a conversation with a friend of his, and they were talking about how well his work is going and the career opportunities and how life is going for him. And his older friend asked him, "Hey, how often do you see your parents?" He's like, "I see my parents about once a year." And how old are they now? And how old are they now? And he's like, they're in the mid 60s.
Mm.
And he's like, okay, so his friend was like, so you'll be seeing them another 15 times. And he's like, oh, damn. Assuming that life expectancy is until, say, 80 or mid 80s, and my parents are in the mid 60s, if I meet them once a year, that means I'm only going to be seeing them physically 20 times. And that came as a shock to him, and he thought, no, 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 this will not fly. All the opportunity in the world is not worth only being able to see my parents 20 times. So they chose to move not all the way back, but
Mm.
to a place a lot closer to where their parents stay. And when I first read that story, it really struck a chord. It really stuck with me, and clearly did, because I wanted to share this, as we are talking about this topic today.
Yeah. No, that's that just displays numerically how shocking it can be when you do have these geographical distances, right? And I know of a lot of friends of mine who do have parents living in completely far off countries, but they're here, and it does become very cumbersome for them to maybe they worry. I think that's the word. Are our parents okay? And recently I have found many of them either bringing their folks back to Spain from wherever they may be, because it's just an easier transition than, relocating an entire family to where the elderly parent lives. So, this is where I want to sort of mention the case study that, I've been working on. It's an interesting one. It's a multi-generational setting in the West. uh, this woman is from my community. She lived with her in laws from the start of her marriage. Okay. After her children grew a bit older, she returned to her career, which coincided with the family transitioning into their own home. And just to give you some data again from Ahuja's paper, he did say that in line with socioeconomic changes, the rise in dual income households has also emerged as a significant feature in urban families, because this delivers the need for smaller family units just for practical reasons. Okay, so it just puts a little bit of context in the case study that I've been working with. So, after her children grew up, as I said, she returned to her career, and this coincided with them transitioning into their own home. In many such cases, they relocate to a nearby apartment, which is what answers your question of, well, people are opting to be near their elders, not in the same home, but nearby. Okay. And this helps to maintain a daily contact in her case with her in laws, whilst living under separate roofs. I would like to read to you all an extract from this contributor, textually as I was sent it by her. She has lived, as I said, in a multi generational setting with members ranging from silent generation to Z. That's 4 generations. And this is how it is as I read it to you. See, in my case, my in laws were quite young when we got married, so there was always a great understanding between us. We have been able to bond very well and be there for each other, for everything. For example, they have been there to take care of my kids, and at the same time, I was there to take care of their parents. We 4 were able to live our free lives, to stand there for each other. Otherwise, leaving old grandparents alone and traveling for months to attend to their own social calendar would not have been possible for them. And the same for me. As working parents, it would have been very difficult to manage 2 small children with their school routines and activities. I think we have mutually helped each other to successfully carry on with our lives. Having the silent generation cohort of my in-laws' parents came with a lot more restrictions and boundaries, which is what I consider the one disadvantage, because this was a strong and conservative elder. My in-laws could never do or say anything against their say, and this did make situations a bit difficult. And that's where I think the generational changes had to come in. I had to start putting my foot down in certain aspects because our generational views were very different without losing respect for one another. I had to explain to them that it is not always going to be the way of the grandparents. Times have changed and things have evolved, and slowly, they had to accept and adapt to our lifestyle rather than changing ours to theirs. As for the children, it has been a blessing for them to be able to grow up with their grandparents. They have been taught great values and respect, and even our Indian culture, as the pujas and satsangs that come with. Yes, we as parents have also done our job, but grandparents had more time to dedicate them for this. The love and respect they used to see us giving the great grandparent is what they have grown up with. A simple example would be to hold the hand of the elder person to help them walk from one place to another. To the fact, when today their grandmother is walking on a bumpy road, they will always hold her hand without being told. It's a natural instinct in them. In our case, their grandparents are another set of parents for them. Disadvantages in this case, well, very few. Teenage behavior is not affected in their relationship. It's just that grandparents are sometimes unable to understand certain situations, like going out and stuff. Lakshan, as I read this extract, a very important observation came to my mind. I will share this, but I know that you've been very introspective, so I want to know what you're thinking.
So this happened today. There was this family that came over to the office to speak to myself, to me and my dad, and it was this mother and her daughter and her uh, sister-in-law. So the 3 of them had come over, and the reason they came over was because um, the mother felt like she has a good relationship with her daughter, but not a great one with her teenage son. Both, like the son is about turning 15 soon, and the daughter is she's already 13. And she was talking about how there's always some kind of a clash between her and her son, and how there are so much of miscommunication happens, and how the son just um, lashes out or speaks very rudely to her when he's angry,
Mm.
without any regard for how she feels or any consequences after that. And she was talking about how these are traits um, that he may have picked up from her, because she also is short tempered, and her husband as well, who also was short tempered, and her husband passed away fairly recently, and because of which she, a working mother, has to take care of work and her children and all of that, and she's living in Bangalore, before which she lived in Bombay, while her um, while her family is in Kerala. So she was talking about how what kind of relationship she wants to have with her son, and how she felt really guilty about, maybe I've not been a very great mother. I'm not the ideal mother, and I can't be because I'm working, and I can't be there when my children come back from school. I can't attend to them with their homework and all that stuff. And when I see my son just spend all of his time on the laptop playing games, I get really frustrated, and I have a go at him because I feel like he's just spending all of his time on that. And the son feels like she's just taking out her work frustration on him.
Mm.
So much of miscommunication and misunderstanding, and I won't go into certain other aspects, but trauma was the term that was thrown around in that entire equation, like with respect to her and with respect to her son even. That's what I was reflecting on as you were sharing this, Goldie, because
Mm.
when you spoke about the examples that was set, no,
Yeah.
about you don't have to tell your children to go hold your grandparents' hands when they are walking, across a bumpy road. It's because these are things that are learned from a young age, and these are
Mm.
things that you you set an example for, and whatever example you set, as the older generation, the younger generation will pick up,
Yeah.
like like moth to the flame. Let's say,
Yeah.
right? It sticks so immediately,
Mm.
and with respect to values and respect, as you shared, while we may feel like we're teaching and sharing the right values, and for the most part, of course, we are,
Mm.
and those values do stick with our children or the younger generation. um, how they observe us interacting with our older generation and with our younger generation, they will pick up on that as well. So she
Exactly.
was one thing she was sharing was about how, even though she has arguments with her mom, and her son has witnessed a lot of those, she's like, at no point would we cross the line.
Yeah.
And my son crosses this line when he's angry with me, and she's like, I don't understand where that's coming from. But then she reflected, as the conversation was a very reflective one, and she's like, you know what, maybe I don't, maybe he doesn't see it in my arguments with my mom, but he sees it in my arguments with him. I'm
Yeah.
very old school. When I say sit down, you sit down. When I say stand up, you stand up. When I say this, because that's the way I was brought up,
Mm.
so I'm passing that down to my children as well. This is what I was reflecting on as I heard you
Yeah.
share all this stuff, Goldie.
Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it? And it's so true about children and teenagers. They don't listen often as much as they see. So, monkey see, monkey do. And I also really felt that as I was reading this extract, and when I received it, because I also received it in writing. I haven't spoken to this person. They're not in the same city as me. And I think this is where I want to just bring in a little theory of my own. If I can ask you all to picture a joint family like a stacked club sandwich with many layers. I know you're getting
That's the
hungry.
stuff. That's the stuff, Goldie.
Okay. So let's imagine the generations are living together as layers in a sandwich. At the top, you have the silent great grandparent, followed by the boomer eldest child as the next layer. In the middle, you'll find their children, probably Gen Xers. And finally, in the bottom layer is made up of the kids of the Xers who might be very early millennials or late Gen Zs, depending on the age differences. In my view, the middle layers serve as the glue that are holding the family together, much like in a sandwich. This role demands what I think is strong leadership. to ensure that everything stays intact. And now let's be real. It's challenging enough to hold a perfectly stacked sandwich together, let alone guide it through the metaphorical leadership challenges that I'm referring to. What do you think of my very hunger inducing theory, Lakshan?
Firstly, I must say that hunger definitely has been induced. I will go back home and order myself some food because this is on you, Goldie. This is your fault. If I get fat, it's on you. Okay?
No problem.
Yeah. That being said, Goldie, I agree with you.
Mm,
And the reason I say that is because I've experienced it myself. My parents have been very um, active with
mm,
respect to making sure that uh, my brother and I have a great relationship with our grandparents, and not even with our maternal grandparents. That's her mom and dad, because we're fairly close to them. With but more so with our paternal ones.
mm.
My dad's side of the family, and because she's like, no, it's important. It's important that we have that relationship, and she urges both sides to form that relationship. No,
Yeah,
because as you said, it's otherwise there are certain leadership challenges that do come into play, and whether we as the ones who are in the bottom portion of the sandwich, whether we like to admit it or not, I think at some capacity we have contributed to whatever challenges that they are facing,
yeah.
and it's on them. They feel like it's on them to take it up and
Mm,
and really keep the sandwich intact, as you said, right? Almost as if you're putting that toothpick, sticking it
yes,
in the middle of the sandwich, right? Yeah.
correct, correct. And I think that's just the statement I want to make to sort of come to conclusions now is leadership truly does begin in the home, you know. And whilst I strongly advocate for the advantages of multi-generational living, we've heard them and experienced them today in our conversation. I also believe it's critical to emphasize the importance of adult independence and decision making outside the influence of the previous generation. Having the freedom to grow without constant presence of an older generation is essential for personal development. I do see the sweet spot somewhere between having your own privacy, um, but being close enough to visit your elders regularly, to encourage the richness of relational learnings between all the parties involved. And so, on that note, we do come to the end of episode 5 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast for today. If you have enjoyed the conversation, remember to like us and share our podcast with others. I have been your host, Goldie.
And I have been your co-host, Lakshan. Thank you so much for listening, and if you're watching us, for watching all the way to the very end.
Muchas gracias.
We'll see you in the next one.
Hasta pronto.
Bye.